Nevada Territory, autumn of 1878, the wind howled down from the hills outside of Elko when the train hissed to a stop and left her behind. Sylvie Darden stood beside the tracks in a wedding dress that no longer felt like hers. The lace cuffs fluttered against her wrists, her suitcase at her feet, dust settling on the fine white hem. She had not cried, not when the porter told her no one else was disembarking. Not when the conductor, awkward and apologetic, said her fiancé had not come. Not even when the train pulled away in a cloud of steam and left her alone in the high desert. She waited. An hour passed, then another. Her gloves grew stiff with the cold and the sun began to sag westward. Her groom, a merchant from San Francisco who promised her a new life in the frontier, had vanished without a word. A wagon creaked down the road leading past the station, pulled by a chestnut gelding and driven by a man in a worn hat and trail-dusted coat. He slowed as he saw her, the only soul for miles in white satin and a look in her eyes like something had broken clean through. He pulled the reins gently. "Ma'am, you waiting for someone?" "My fiancé," she said, voice steady, "but he is not coming." The man looked at her, really looked. He had deep-set green eyes and a tired kindness to him. "I figured as much," he said quietly. "Name's Weston Shaw, folks call me Wes." She nodded once. "Sylvie Darden." He climbed down from the wagon. "You got people in town?" "No." Her fingers curled tight around the handle of her suitcase. "Just a letter from a man who lied." Wes looked at the sky, then back at her. "Well, you cannot stay here. Come on, I got a ranch about 10 miles out. You can stay the night, figure things in the morning." "I do not know you," she said. "No, ma'am." "And you do not know what kind of man left you standing here either." That stung. But it was true. She studied him. His boots were worn, but his shirt was clean. He moved like a man who worked hard and slept light, and he had stopped. She climbed into the wagon. They rode in quiet. The sun dipped lower, painting the desert gold and red. Wes handed her a blanket from behind the seat. "Gets cold fast out here." "Thank you." "Why did you come?" he asked finally. "Because I thought I was starting a life," she said, watching the land roll by. "I left everything. My father died last year. My sister married and moved to Kansas. I had nothing left in Illinois, so when he wrote, when he promised," she stopped. "It does not matter, it matters," Wes said. "You deserve better than what he gave you." They reached the ranch as the last of the sun dipped behind the hills. It was modest, a small house, a barn, a few outbuildings. A corral held 2 horses and smoke curled from the chimney. Inside, the house smelled like wood smoke and stew. He led her in, lit a lamp and said, "You can have the bedroom, I will take the cot." "I cannot." "You will," he said, not unkindly. "You are not sleeping on the floor in a wedding dress." He left her to wash up. She changed into a flannel shirt and trousers he left outside the door, cinched with a belt. They were too big, but warm when she came out. He ladled stew into 2 bowls and handed her one. She ate slowly, the warmth easing the tight coil in her chest. He sat across from her, quiet, letting her be. She watched him, the way his jaw moved when he chewed, the scar just above his collarbone, the way his eyes never lingered on her unfairly. "You live here alone?" she asked. He nodded. "Got a few hands come spring, but it is just me now." "No family," he shook his head. "Not anymore." She did not ask more. She knew that silence. She had carried it too. After supper, she stood by the kitchen window and looked out across the night. "You did not have to stop today." "No," Wes said softly, "but I am glad I did." She turned to him. "Why?" He met her eyes. "Because no one should be left standing like that, and because you looked like someone worth knowing." She did not answer, could not. Her throat tightened. He turned away then, respectful. "Get some rest. Morning always feels better than night." She nodded. Behind the bedroom door, she sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded in her lap. The wind moved around the house, steady and strong. She did not cry, not yet. But she thought of how he had looked at her, not with pity, but something steadier. The next morning, Sylvie woke before the sun. She dressed in the same clothes, braided her hair, and stepped outside. Wes was already in the barn, feeding the horses. "You sleep all right?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder. "I did, thank you. You planning on heading back east?" She looked at the horizon. "No." "Well," he said, brushing straw from his hands, "then maybe you could help me mend the fence today." She blinked. "You want my help?" He shrugged. "You have 2 hands and a strong will. I could use both." She smiled, small but real. "All right." They worked side by side most of the day. She learned to hammer nails, brace posts, and knot wire. He showed her how to handle a rope without slicing her palm. When she stumbled, he caught her elbow before she fell. His hand lingered a second too long, then let go. At dusk, they sat on the back porch. He handed her a cup of coffee and they watched the sun set behind the hills. "I thought I was going to start a life," she said quietly, "and maybe I did. Just not the one I expected." He glanced at her. "Sometimes what you find is better than what you were chasing." She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time since the train, the heaviness in her chest eased. She did not know yet what this was. But she knew he had seen her at her lowest and stayed. And maybe, just maybe, she was not abandoned anymore. The morning after the fence work, Sylvie woke to the smell of coffee and the low murmur of a man talking to his horse. She stepped out into the crisp air, pulling Wes's old coat tighter around her shoulders. The sleeves hung past her knuckles, but it held the warmth of use, and she didn't mind. Wes was tightening a saddle strap when he looked up. "Thought I might ride out toward the canyon today," he said. "Check on the waterline. You're welcome to come along if you can ride." "I can," she said. "Side saddle mostly." He paused, then nodded once. "The dun mare's steady. I'll rig her up." She went back inside and pulled on the boots he'd left by the door yesterday, too big by half, but she stuffed the toes with wool and made do. Out here, it seemed, everything was a matter of making do. The ride out followed a narrow trail of packed dirt and scrub. The dun mare moved easy beneath her, and Wes kept his mount at a pace she could match. The sky stretched wide overhead, pale blue and cloudless, and jackrabbits scattered as they passed. "Halfway to the canyon," she asked. "How long have you had this land?" "Since after the war," he said. "Bought it with my share of the payout. It was mostly sagebrush and old bones back then." "You fought, infantry, Union side, Arkansas and Tennessee mostly." He glanced over. "I don't talk about it much. I won't ask more." They rode in silence a while longer, the wind threading through the grass. When they reached the canyon ridge, the land dropped away into layered rock and shadow. A creek ran below, low but moving. Wes dismounted, crouched near the edge, and watched the water for a time. Sylvie stayed in the saddle, hands resting on the horn. She studied the way he moved, not cautious but deliberate. Every motion had purpose. No wasted effort. He stood and brushed dust from his palms, still flowing. "That's something?" she asked. "Do you ever get lonely out here?" He looked up at her, then toward the far ridge. "Used to, not so much lately." She didn't respond, but something settled in her chest, quiet and sure. On the ride back, they stopped near a stand of quaking aspen. Wes reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a folded cloth, laying out a wedge of bread and a tin of beans. He passed half to her without a word. "This place," she said after a while, "it's not what I pictured." "The West, I mean." He chewed, then said, "Most folks think it's all saloons and gunfights, but mostly it's dirt, hard work, and long days." "I think I like it better this way," she said. He looked over at her, not smiling, but something in his face softened. "You're not what I pictured either." She met his eyes. "Good or bad, better." They packed up and rode on. Back at the ranch, Wes handed her the reins and said, "I've got to run into town tomorrow, pick up feed and a new plow handle. You can come if you like." "Will folks in town ask questions?" He shrugged. "Maybe, but you didn't do anything wrong." "I left in a white dress and arrived in trousers." He gave a quiet nod. "Then they'll know you're not one to be trifled with." She laughed, the sound catching her by surprise. "I suppose they will." That night, she sat near the hearth, sewing a patch on a shirt Wes had torn on the fence. He sat across from her, oiling his saddle, the lamplight casting long shadows. She asked, "Do you believe some things happen for a reason?" He didn't look up. "I believe people find each other when they need to." She tied off the thread and folded the shirt. "Then I'm glad you came down that road when you did." Now he looked at her. "So am I." Neither of them said anything else for a long while. The fire crackled, the wind outside rose and fell, and between them stretched an understanding not yet named but growing, steady as the dawn. The wagon rolled slow through the edge of Elko, wheels creaking over packed earth, was guiding the reins with one hand and tipping his hat to a passing rancher with the other. Sylvie sat beside him, sun catching the edge of her cheekbone, her gaze steady as they passed the livery and the mercantile. She wore a skirt now borrowed from a neighbor woman Wes had quietly asked for help the day before, and a calico blouse she'd mended herself at the cuff. Her hair was pinned cleanly back, and her spine didn't waver, even when a few townsfolk turned to watch them. A boy paused on the boardwalk outside the post office and whispered something to his sister. Wes didn't look their way. "You said they might ask questions," Sylvie murmured. "They haven't earned answers," he said. She nodded once and brushed her hand against the hem of her skirt, as if grounding herself. At the general store, Wes carried the feed orders while Sylvie lingered near the bolts of fabric stacked in careful rows. Her fingers grazed a soft indigo muslin, then drifted away. When she turned, the shopkeep was watching her with a peculiar tilt to his brow. "You here with Shaw?" the man asked. "I am," she said. He snorted lightly. "Didn't know he kept company." "He doesn't, but I'm not company." That answer seemed to settle something. The shopkeeper gave her a respectful nod and turned back to measuring flour. Outside, Wes loaded the last sack into the wagon bed and handed her a wrapped parcel. "Pattern book and a yard of that muslin," he said. "Figured you might make something from it." Her hand closed around the bundle. "You didn't have to, I know." As they drove out past the edge of town, she tilted her face toward the sky. "That man in the store, he looked surprised to see me with you. Folks still think I live like I did before, solitary, quiet." "I let them. You prefer it that way." "I did." They crossed a narrow stream that shimmered under the light. Sylvie watched the water with a thoughtful look, then said, "I never learned to swim. Not many rivers in Illinois. There were a few, but I stayed away. My mother feared water." She said it had a mind of its own. He glanced at her. "You believe that?" I believed her. After a stretch of silence, Wes said, "There's a spring-fed pond behind the hay pasture, clear and shallow. When the weather warms, I could teach you." She turned to him. "You do that, if you want to learn." Her voice was quiet. "I think I do." They reached the ranch by late afternoon. Wes led the team into the barn while Sylvie carried the parcel inside. She set it on the kitchen table and stood a moment, palms flat against the wood, her gaze drifting to the window. Outside, the land rolled gold and wide, no fences in sight. When Wes stepped in, he held a folded slip of paper. "Letter came with the freight," he said. "Addressed to you." She took it and read the return mark. Her jaw tightened. She didn't open it. He didn't press. Later, as dusk gathered, she stood at the edge of the field with a hoe in hand, working the soil where Wes had marked rows for spring planting. He joined her, dropping a sack of seed near the edge and kneeling to check the furrows. "It's good earth," she said. "Hard packed, but it'll hold." She brushed dirt from her palms. "When this grows, what will we do with it all? Store some, trade some, eat what we can." She hesitated. "I'd like to learn how to preserve it, the right way." He met her eyes, then nodded. "I'll show you." Twilight deepened. He reached for the hoe and leaned it against the fence, then offered his hand without speaking. She took it. They walked back toward the house, side by side, boots scuffing in the dry grass. At the porch, she paused at the steps. "When I first came here," she said, "I didn't know how to be anything but ashamed. You carried yourself like someone who'd been wronged, not someone broken." She looked at him. "I'm not the same woman who stepped off that train." "I know." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the faint line at the corner of his mouth, the steady calm in his gaze. "I don't expect anything from you, Sylvie. But if you choose to stay, I'll make room for whatever you become." Her breath caught, not from surprise, but relief. She laid her hand lightly against his chest. I already chose, she said. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached up and brushed the back of his fingers along her cheek, reverent and certain. The porch light cast a soft glow behind them as they stood in the hush between day and night. No promises spoken, but one already kept. Inside, the muslin lay folded on the table, waiting. By mid-March, the snowmelt had turned the lower pastures soft, and the scent of damp sagebrush hung thick in the morning air. Wes had begun breaking the new ground behind the barn, and Sylvie spent most days in the kitchen or garden plot, sleeves rolled high, hands stained with loam. Neither of them said exactly what they were building, but they built it, piece by piece, without stepping around it. One evening, as the sky deepened to violet, Sylvie stood by the washbasin, wringing out a damp cloth. Her palms were raw from scrubbing, but she didn't mind the ache. Wes came in carrying a length of timber across his shoulder, boots slick with mud. "I cut the beam for the chicken coop frame," he said. She looked over her shoulder. "You're still set on building that? Well, I figure if we're going to keep hens, they'll need more than a box and a prayer. I haven't agreed to hens. You keep measuring feed for livestock we don't own yet." She smiled faintly and turned back to the basin. "They'll need nesting boxes. I plan to carve them myself." He leaned the timber against the far wall and walked toward her, movements slow from the day's work. She dried her hands with a cloth and stepped aside to let him wash. "You ever keep livestock back in Illinois?" he asked, rinsing his arms. "No, my father grew barley. My mother refused animals in the house. She said they belonged to the land, not the hearth." "And you?" "What do you think?" "I think the land's only generous when it's met halfway." His jaw shifted slightly, thoughtful, but he said nothing. After supper, they sat outside on the porch steps, the kindling box between them needing sorting. Sylvie pulled twine from a bundle of sticks while Wes shaved down a splintered handle with his drawknife. She asked, "Did you always want to work land?" "No. At first I just wanted to be left alone." She straightened a twig and laid it neatly in the box. "And now," he drew the blade down the wood, slow and even. "Now I want to make something that outlasts me. I don't want to disappear, Wes." He set the handle aside. "You won't." She looked down at her hands, the dirt beneath her nails, the faint pink line across her knuckle from a tin lid. "I used to think I'd be a wife in a city row house. Collars, lace curtains, a pianoforte. You miss that idea?" "I think I miss the girl who believed it was what she wanted." He shifted closer, knees brushing. "You're not her anymore." "No," she said. "But I'm not sorry for the change." The wind stirred the dry grass. Somewhere in the barn, a horse shifted in its stall. Wes reached for a small box tucked beneath the porch rail and held it out. "What's this?" He hesitated. "Came with the dry goods order. I saw it and thought it might be something you'd use." She opened the box slowly. Inside lay a pair of sewing shears, heavy and sharp, with black handles and clean blades. Her breath caught. "These are fine. You've been using a fruit knife to cut fabric." "Figured you deserved better." She closed the lid, fingers resting on the worn wood. "Thank you. I wanted to give you something your own, not borrowed, not left behind." He stood then, not waiting for her to say more, and walked toward the barn. She watched him go. The way his shoulders moved beneath his shirt, the quiet steadiness he carried even when he thought no one watched. That night, she placed the shears in the drawer beside the stove, not hidden but kept. The next morning, Sylvie rose before the sun and traced the edge of the new garden rows with her boot heel. She stooped and pressed a seed into the soil, then another, her breath visible in the cold air. Wes stepped out onto the porch and watched her for a long moment before joining her with a sack of cuttings and a coil of twine. They worked without speaking, hands moving in rhythm, soil caking their boots. When the last row was marked, he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his thumb grazing her temple. "Come spring," he said, "this place'll look different." She nodded. "So will we." He took her hand then, rough palm to rough palm, and held it without urgency. Neither spoke of what they were becoming. They let it grow, like roots beneath the frost line, deep, unseen, certain. The early May wind came in soft that year, carrying the scent of pine from the western slopes and the first warm breath of summer. The garden behind the house had begun to green in earnest beans curling up twine trellises, onions pushing pale shoots through the soil, and the muslin Sylvie had dyed with walnut husks fluttered on the line like a signal flag. Inside, she bent over the table, stitching the last hem on a cotton blouse she'd patterned herself. The shears Wes had given her lay open beside her elbow, sharp and precise. When she heard the barn door creak open and the deliberate sound of boots crossing the yard, she didn't look up. "I thought you were riding fence," she said. "I did," Wes replied, stepping over the threshold. "But I ran into someone at the creek who said he was looking for you." Sylvie set the needle down slowly. "Who?" Wes reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out the unopened letter she'd tucked away weeks ago, the one marked with the San Francisco return. "He's come all the way from Humboldt. Said he works with your former fiancé. Name's Gray. He's waiting outside." Her fingers tightened slightly on the tabletop, then eased. She stood, outside. A thin man with a city man's complexion and a worn traveling coat stood by the fence, hat in hand. His boots were too clean for the journey. "Sylvie Darden?" he asked. "I am," he gave a short nod. "I'm sorry to trouble you. I was sent to bring you back. Julius, he regrets what happened. He's asked for a second chance." Wes stood quiet, unmoving by the door. Sylvie barely glanced at him. "And what did he send with you?" she asked. "A ring, a letter." "A promise wrapped in ribbon." Gray hesitated. "He didn't send anything but his name." Sylvie looked past the man, past the road and the hills beyond. Then she turned back to him and said, "Tell him I've planted onions. I don't understand. Then tell him I've got dirt under my nails and a man who built me a chicken coop before I asked him to. Tell him I found the life he promised me, and it's nothing like the one he offered." Gray looked from her to Wes, then gave a short bow. "I'll pass it along." She watched him go. Wes didn't speak until the man's figure had faded into the pale dust of the road. "You waited a long time to open that letter." "I didn't need to," she said. "I already knew what it would say." She walked past him into the yard toward the coop. He followed, slow and quiet. At the fence, she turned. "I've been thinking," she said. "If I stay here, I'd like to make soap. We've lard, and I can ask Mrs. Latham to show me how to treat lye." Wes tilted his head. "You planning to stay?" She stepped closer. "I already have." The moment passed between them like the hush after a thunderclap, still and full of weight. He reached for her hand and she let him take it. "I haven't asked you properly," he said. "I should have." She shook her head. "You built me a coop. That's better than a ring." "I'll give you both," he said. "If you want them." "I do." He leaned in then, slow and certain, and kissed her. It wasn't rushed or uncertain. It was the kind of kiss that settled into the bones, that said what words hadn't needed to. Her hand rested against the side of his neck. His thumb brushed her jaw. When they pulled apart, neither looked away. That night, they sat at the table and made a list of supplies for the soap, of things to trade at market, of names. Not for children yet, but for the heifer they'd buy come summer, and the dog Wes had seen nosing around the feed sacks last week. Later, she lay beside him beneath the quilt, her body curved into the space she'd grown to fill. He traced the line of her shoulder in the dark. "You're not what I expected," he said. She smiled against his chest. "You didn't expect a woman with calloused hands and a temper." "I didn't expect to want anything at all, not again." They said nothing else. They didn't need to. Years passed, as years do. The garden grew wide, then wider. The coop filled with hens, and Sylvie's soap wrapped in brown paper and marked with her initials began to sell at the summer fair. Wes built a second room on the house, then a third. They slept each night with the windows cracked, the land breathing around them. Neighbors came and went. Children sometimes ran through the pasture, nieces, nephews, the sons and daughters of friends. At night, Sylvie read aloud by lamplight, and Wes listened with the quiet patience of a man who'd learned to love the sound of her voice more than the words themselves. They never spoke again of the man from San Francisco. They didn't need to. They had the onions and the coop and the long line of fence posts they'd sunk together in the spring of '79. They had one another and the steady rhythm of a life built not from promises, but from work, care, and time. One evening, long after the first white hairs had found the edges of Wes's beard, Sylvie stood at the porch rail and watched the sun pour gold across the field. He stepped behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and rested his chin on her shoulder. "Still glad you stayed?" he asked. "Every day." They stood there until the light faded and the world turned quiet again, and they never left.